On the 30th of September 1139, Empress Matilda and her half-brother Robert of Gloucester landed in England, but they landed in a location that you wouldn't really consider useful when trying to claim England. The Angevin party landed 5 miles off the coast of Arundel, as normally the usual landing point for an army trying to land in England would be Dover, as Dover was the closest location in England to the mainland of Europe. However, King Stephen had been preparing for the Angevin landing for some time and had fortified Dover, making a landing there incredibly difficult. Prior to landing in England, Empress Matilda had been corresponding with her former stepmother, Adeliza. Adeliza herself was living a comfortable life after the death of her first husband, Henry I, as she had inherited a vast estate at Arundel and enjoyed life to the finest degree a medieval noblewoman could enjoy. She had also remarried to one of King Henry's advisor, Henry de Beny, and the couple would have 7 children together, which put an end to the rumours that she was infertile during her marriage to King Henry. The relationship between Adeliza and Empress Matilda was of a strong friendship, as they had been friends since childhood, yet Adeliza and her husband supported King Stephen, her husband enthusiastically so. Why Adeliza had offered her own estates as a landing zone for Empress Matilda's attempt at claiming the English crown is certainly a debate. Did she offer it out of loving friendship, or could her offer be part of an elaborate trap? We don't know. We do know that Empress Matilda and Robert landed with 140 knights and some 3,000 infantry, not exactly like the great army her grandfather William the Conqueror had brought with him when he invaded England in 1066. But Empress Matilda and Robert didn't need a grand army from across the sea. No, they could rely on Robert's own retinue and followers, as soon as they landed, Robert set off straight to Bristol, while Empress Matilda stayed at Arundel. In Corfe, King Stephen was in the middle of another siege at Corfe Castle. Besieging forts and castles would be the primary form of confrontation during the Anarchy, as a pitched battle would become exceedingly risky for both sides, as one major battle could cause the end of one campaign or leave both sides exhausted, leading to a stalemate. For both sides, having loyal men in strategic positions was vital in this war, as between 1138 and 1142, King Stephen appointed many aristocratic nobles to earls, some of which were given strategic border cities, Yorkshire, Pembroke, Worcester, Northumbria and Herefordshire. As since the reign of William the Conqueror, England's castles had expanded significantly, some starting as wooden castles before being replaced by stone ones. Of course, no 2 castles were the same. Some were more fortified than others, and some were just built in more advantageous terrain. Edinburgh Castle is a perfect example, but besieging a castle would also be a risky venture, as depending on the castle's fortifications, a siege could take weeks, months, or even years before being captured. Plus disease, such as dysentery, could ravage the besiegers. There were easier ways, however, to take a rival's castle. Burning down the wooden doors and storming inside was a common tactic, as Greek fire was now appearing in Western Europe. Another method was mining under the walls and causing them to collapse. There are plenty of methods to attack and defend a castle. When the news reached King Stephen that Empress Matilda had landed in Arundel, he immediately marched what forces he had 90 miles to Arundel, and soon he was in sight of the castle where his rival to the throne was staying. But King Stephen faced a dilemma. Firstly, there was technically nothing wrong with Empress Matilda being in England, as she had been invited by her former mother-in-law, and wasn't necessarily occupying the castle as her own. No, she was a guest of Adeliza and William, who had displayed no acts of disloyalty. Still, the situation was awkward, as King Stephen couldn't just arrest a noblewoman visiting family. This is where Empress Matilda's gender played to her favour for once. Arresting a noblewoman and possibly mistreating her would be a terrible look for a Middle Ages king. The situation was a delicate one. The other issue is Arundel Castle was a fortified castle that would not be easy to capture, especially with a garrison of nearly 3,000 strong. A siege could take months, and King Stephen had no news on Robert of Gloucester's whereabouts, so King Stephen sought to negotiate with Adeliza. The chronicler John of Worcester writes, "The ex-queen was awed by the king's majesty and was afraid she might lose what rank she had in England, and solemnly swore that no enemy of the king had come to England through her doing, only providing hospitality to those who were known to her." A rather stunning answer to the king. Indeed, Empress Matilda was a guest in Adeliza's home, and King Stephen probably wouldn't be able to find any evidence to suggest Adeliza was lying to him. The negotiations were yielding little results. The deeds of Stephen, one of our main sources, suggests that Robert of Gloucester was King Stephen's main target and not Empress Matilda. We can guess that may be true, as Robert was the one with the follow in England, as Empress Matilda had yet to build up her own base. Not that she didn't have people willing to support her, she just hadn't established herself, as King Stephen was quick to trap her in the first location she arrived at. The deeds of Stephen also tells us the king's next move. He planned to carry on with the siege, but on the advice from his brother, the Bishop of Winchester Henry, he should allow Empress Matilda to leave and join her brother, as finding Robert should be the top priority, as King Stephen's men hadn't intercepted Robert, as by now he was most likely near Bristol. Seeing no other option, King Stephen hesitantly agreed to his brother's suggestion. Empress Matilda would be allowed to leave with an escort to her brother. A tense situation now resolved, Empress Matilda must have breathed a sigh of relief. Some chroniclers heavily criticise King Stephen for this action, and some praise him for the chivalry shown. Perhaps it was better for the two to be together in one place than apart. Or there was just no moving forward with a solid plan of capturing the castle. Empress Matilda was safely escorted to Bristol. Bishop Henry was among the escort, and the two most likely conversed about all manner of topics, but we don't have any details on what they discussed. Empress Matilda arrived in Bristol in October 1139, and already a supporter of hers was making himself known. Earl Baldwin, the first man to challenge King Stephen's authority in 1136 at Exeter, had launched an assault at Corfe, and soon another man swore allegiance to Empress Matilda, Miles of Gloucester, the High Sheriff of Gloucestershire. Miles was an experienced commander with vast territories, starting from Abergavenny to the Forest of Dean. His support would boost the Angevin cause greatly. Another man who immediately swore fealty to Empress Matilda was Brian Fitzcount. He owned one of the most impregnable castles of the age, Wallingford Castle in the county of Oxfordshire. This castle would withstand many sieges over the course of the Anarchy. With these new supporters, Empress Matilda now had a base in the southwest of England. However, she was cut off from receiving support from Anjou, and her uncle, the Scottish King David, could do little to help other than moral support. But now the civil war was beginning to take shape. Each side held fortified castles and forts. Although King Stephen had been quick to put down anyone who declared support for Empress Matilda and Robert of Gloucester, the fact that Robert was now physically in England rejuvenated his supporters' morale, and now with Wallingford Castle in the Angevin control, they had a stronghold right in King Stephen's territories, a blessing and a curse. The castle would be isolated if besieged, as reinforcements would take time to get to the castle. But, on the other hand, Wallingford Castle was an immensely impressive structure, and although the castle is now a ruins, it featured two moats, and looking at the ruins, we can see a glimmer of how impressive it was back in its heyday. Wallingford Castle was King Stephen's first target, and he soon began preparations for a siege. He first attempted to blockade the castle, but on the recommendation from his barons, he changed tactics, as the castle had plenty of provisions and began issuing orders for a counter castle to be built. A counter-castle, as the name implies, was built in order to contest the power of the besieged castle, built further away where a garrison could be placed and used to support or assault the enemy's castle. They were usually made from wood and earth, although there are some stone counter-castles, and while the counter-castle was being constructed, King Stephen marched towards Trowbridge, and along the way his forces managed to capture a small castle at South Kearney, and another one at Malmesbury before advancing onwards. However, while King Stephen was making progress, Miles of Gloucester quickly demonstrated what kind of opponent he would be by rapidly crossing the county and striking King Stephen's army at Wallingford Castle, taking them by surprise and destroying the counter-castle they were building. King Stephen's army was now routed, with some dead and some captured for ransom. For King Stephen, this may have felt like one step forward and two steps back, as now two of Empress Matilda's main commanders were only 50 miles away from London with an army ready to march. When the news reached King Stephen, he immediately ordered his army to march to London. With the king back at the capital, Miles then launched a raid into Worcester. We have an eyewitness account from the chronicler John of Worcester, a monk at Worcester Priory, who describes the attack coming from the north wall. There being no fortifications on that side, the entire host rushes tumultuously in, mad with fury, and set fire to the houses in many parts. Alas, a considerable portion of the city is destroyed, immense plunder is carried off, consisting of chattel of all kinds from the city and of oxen, sheep, cattle and horses from the country. Many people are taken in the streets and suburbs and dragged into miserable captivity. Whatever their foes fix for their ransom, they are forced to promise on oath to pay. The town was badly damaged, but the castle withstood the assault. Worcester would become the first victim of a lengthy, destructive civil war in the Midlands of England. Henry of Huntingdon describes the next year of 1140 as gaunt famine, following wastes away, whom murder spares with slow decay.